$7.7 million does not vanish like a misplaced receipt in a jacket pocket. And Stephen Miller knew that the moment Representative Moskowitz opened that blue folder. This was not a normal oversight hearing. This was not another sleepy budget session where officials hide behind acronyms, legal fog, and phrases so dull they feel designed to make taxpayers stop listening. This was a public test of whether an emergency declaration can become a key that unlocks federal money, moves it through dark corridors, and then leaves Congress staring at silence. So the question was brutally simple. Where did the $7.7 million go? Not $70. Not $7,000. $7.7 million in taxpayer money. Stephen Miller had declared a border emergency on February 14th, describing the El Paso sector as facing an unprecedented surge that required immediate federal intervention. He requested $8.9 million in urgent funding. He got the money. Then the spending report came back showing only $1.2 million spent on actual border operations. That left a gap large enough to swallow every excuse in the room. $8.9 million requested. $1.2 million spent on the stated emergency. $7.7 million sitting in the air, like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to admit had started. Representative Moskowitz did not need theater because the documents were already dramatic enough. He did not pound the table. He did not scream. He simply placed the declaration beside the operational spending report and let the math do the cross-examination. That is when the room changed. Before that moment, Miller looked comfortable, almost bored, surrounded by attorneys and aides, ready for the usual rhythm of Washington oversight. Read the prepared language. Repeat operational response. Mention field assessments. Run out the clock. Leave before anyone finds the wire. But Moskowitz had the wire. He had the emergency declaration. He had the spending report. And he had the one question no polished answer could survive. Mr. Miller, where is the $7.7 million? Miller's hands flattened against the table. His voice stayed controlled, but his answer immediately slipped into the swamp of multiple operational phases, reserve allocations, and contingency response. That was not an answer. That was a smoke machine. Because when a senior official can explain why he needed $8.9 million, but cannot clearly explain why only $1.2 million went to the emergency he described, the issue is no longer budgeting. It is accountability. It is custody. It is whether public money followed public law or whether an invented crisis became a private doorway. Then Moskowitz changed the temperature of the room with one more document. Not louder, not faster, just sharper. He reached not into the blue folder, but into his jacket pocket, as if he had saved the real blade for the moment Stephen Miller thought he could survive on fog. The document was Customs and Border Protection operational data from February 14th through February 28th. The exact period Stephen Miller had described as an unprecedented surge, and the numbers did not just weaken his claim. They flipped it upside down. The daily average encounters in the El Paso sector were 247 people. The previous month's daily average was 251 people. That means the so-called surge was actually 4 fewer people per day. 4 fewer. A decrease. Not a flood. Not a wave. Not an emergency screaming for bypassed review and urgent money. A decrease so small and so plain, it made the entire emergency declaration look like a siren taped to a parked car. Moskowitz looked at Stephen Miller and made the timeline unavoidable. You declared an emergency for a surge that did not exist. You requested $8.9 million in urgent funding. You spent $1.2 million on actual border operations, and the remaining $7.7 million went somewhere you still have not explained. That is the point where this stopped being a disagreement over policy. This became a question about whether fear was used as paperwork, because emergencies are powerful. An emergency lets government move fast. An emergency lets officials skip normal friction. An emergency tells the public, trust us now and ask questions later. But later arrived in room 2154, and the questions had receipts. Miller tried to retreat into the safe language of procedure. He said the money had been reallocated under standard budgetary protocols. That sounds clean until you remember what it means. Reallocated means the money left the purpose used to justify it. Reallocated means the crisis sold to Congress was not where the money ultimately stayed. Reallocated means the taxpayer was shown one door while the money walked through another. So Moskowitz asked the only question left. Reallocated to what? And Miller did not answer. He looked to counsel. Counsel wrote frantically. The room waited. The cameras stayed locked. And in that silence, the story became uglier than the number itself. Because $7.7 million missing from an emergency claim is bad. But $7.7 million defended with silence is worse. That silence told the public that the problem was not confusion. It was exposure. Then came the contractor list. That was the moment the hearing moved from suspicious math into prosecutorial territory. Moskowitz placed another document on the table, turned it face up, and let the room see what Stephen Miller had not volunteered. 7 contractors. Total payments, $6.8 million. All paid from the February emergency fund. All connected to the same emergency declaration that was supposed to respond to a border surge the CBP data did not support. Now the numbers were no longer floating. They had destinations. $1.2 million went to actual border operations. $6.8 million went to contractors. That makes $8 million accounted for on paper. But it still leaves $900,000 sitting outside the explanation like a locked drawer in a crime scene. And even the contractor payments created a bigger problem. According to the document Moskowitz produced, all 7 companies had been incorporated within 6 months of Miller's emergency declaration. All 7 shared the same registered agent in Delaware. All 7 had no established history of federal contracting. All 7 received their first and only government contract through Miller's office. That is not a normal procurement pattern. That is a flashing warning light. A real emergency does not usually wait for 7 brand-new companies to appear out of legal paperwork like mushrooms after rain. A real emergency does not explain itself by sending millions to entities with no public track record, no visible history, and one shared registration trail. So Moskowitz asked the question that mattered more than the payment amount. Who owns these 7 companies? And that is when Stephen Miller stopped performing confidence. No long answer. No procedural lecture. No speech about operational complexity. Just stillness. He stared forward while the committee room watched him refuse to touch the one fact that could explain whether this was incompetence, favoritism, concealment, or something worse. For 391 seconds, the answer did not come. 6 minutes and 31 seconds of silence over one simple ownership question. Think about that like an ordinary American. You miss one line on a tax form, and the system fines you. You overdraft a bank account by $30, and the fees arrive before dinner. But $6.8 million can move to 7 newly formed contractors. $900,000 can remain unexplained, and the official who approved the emergency can sit before Congress and decline to say who got the money. That is the moral contrast. Power gets patience. Citizens get penalties. Miller finally said he was not in a position to disclose ownership information without legal review and authorization. But that answer only sharpened the contradiction. He was in a position to request the emergency money. He was in a position to approve payments. He was in a position to sign reports. But suddenly, when asked who benefited, he was not in a position to speak. That is not accountability. That is a locked door wearing a government badge. And this is where the story stops being only about Stephen Miller. Because the real victim in that hearing was not a spreadsheet. It was the public. It was every taxpayer who is told, there is never enough money for safer schools, faster disaster aid, cleaner veteran care, better border technology, or basic services that actually touch real families. It was every honest federal employee who has to follow procurement rules line by line, while powerful officials wrap millions of dollars in the word emergency and then act offended when someone asks for a receipt. It was every border agent who hears Washington use their mission as a stage prop, while the actual operational spending shows only $1.2 million went to the border work Stephen Miller claimed was so urgent. That is why Moskowitz's question mattered. Where is the $7.7 million? That question was not just accounting. It was a moral X-ray. It showed the bones under the performance. An emergency was declared for a surge the data did not show. Urgent funding was requested before normal review could slow it down. Only a fraction went to the stated border operation. Millions went to 7 newly formed contractors with the same registered agent. $900,000 remained unexplained. And when asked who owned the companies, Stephen Miller gave the country 391 seconds of silence. That silence is the image people will remember. Not the polished opening statement, not the bureaucratic phrases, not the legal padding. The silence. 6 minutes and 31 seconds of a senior official sitting in front of Congress, while the question hung in the air like smoke after a fire. And the ugliest part is not even that he refused to answer. The ugliest part is that the system allowed the money to move first and demanded clarity later. That is backwards. In a functioning republic, emergency power is supposed to be a fire extinguisher behind glass. You break it when danger is real. You do not use it like a side door into the treasury. So no, this was not only about party politics. This was about whether public law still controls public money. It was about whether officials can manufacture urgency, move taxpayer dollars, hide behind contractors, and then call silence a legal strategy. Because if a government official can declare a crisis that the numbers do not support, take $8.9 million, spend $1.2 million on the stated mission, send $6.8 million to companies the public cannot identify, leave $900,000 unexplained, and still refuse to say who benefited, then what exactly is oversight supposed to mean? So here's the final question. When the people in power stop answering for the money, how long before the people paying the bill stop believing in the system? Like this video if you think receipts matter. Comment below where you think the $7.7 million went. Share this with someone who still believes emergency should not mean untraceable. And subscribe, because the next document may be the one they never wanted you to see.